welcome to the brass class lecture on the tuba. I normally would give this live, and I'm sorry that we can't be live today, but we'll do the next best thing. We'll do as much as we can. Always know that you can get in touch with me anytime if you have any questions about the tuba or anything tuba related or brass related, as well as Professor Fox and everybody else in the conservatory in the brass division. We'll all help you out as much as we can. So we're going to talk about the tuba today. The tuba, of course, is the bass voice of the brass choir. It was invented, actually, a patent came out in 1837 as the bass voice of the horn ensemble, or the horn choir, because it is a conical instrument, therefore has a tubing that gradually gets wider as the instrument lengthens. But has kind of taken its role as the bottom end of the trombone section in the orchestra, as well as other non-traditional roles, such as the bass player in the early recordings of, for instance, Louis Armstrong's Hot Fives and Hot Sevens. There's a tuba as the bass in those days until the tuba was supplanted by the string bass. We still have the tuba as bass in the New Orleans ensembles. Of course, we have our position at the back of the orchestra. One player in the orchestra. And sorry, that was my dog running through here like crazy. It's going to happen a few times. Of course, several tubas at the back of every concert band. It's the largest of the brass instruments. Just for comparison, this is the B-flat tuba, which is the tuba that most of you will deal with as you're going teaching. From mouthpiece to bell is 18 feet long, which when you close it by putting your mouth in the tube makes it a closed tube. So it's a 36-foot long vibrating column of air to create the sound of the pedal B-flat. That's a 36-foot stop on the pipe organ. And then, of course, most of them come in a 3-valve configuration is normal. Most of the tubas that you're going to deal with at the high school level will be 4-valve, but you still will deal with some instruments that are 3. This is the largest of the brass instruments. The B-flat tuba is the largest at the 18-foot physical length. And it has the widest range of any of the brass instruments. I know that there are a lot of brass players that would disagree with that, horn players especially. But because of the exceptional low range of the tuba, you understand at this being the end of brass class that the high range is completely only limited by you, the player, how high you can play. And I'll demonstrate some things to you as we go. So I've got my other tuba here, by the way, which I want to show you as well. This is my E-flat tuba, which doesn't look a whole lot smaller than my B-flat tuba. Physically, it's not very, but the E-flat tuba from mouthpiece to bell is 14 and a half feet long, or 29 feet when you put your mouth on it and turn it into a closed tube. So let's get right to it. So starting tuba players, a little controversy. That's probably the wrong word. Maybe that's a little harsh. A lot of teachers don't start tuba players in the 6th grade, partially because of physical size. The instrument is difficult to wield. I am a believer that if you've got a student who can physically hold the thing, it's totally all right. Quite often, what we'll see is because of the shorter stature and even the 3/4 tubas that when we'll talk about the sizes of tubas, the smaller tubas that you're going to have in junior high still will be a little too large for those smaller players. They do make a thing, and I do have one. How about that? I almost forgot to bring it. This is called a tuba rest. If you see it, it just sits on the ground on this tripod, and the tuba sits in this cup. These can be purchased for anywhere from $60 to $150, depending on the brand. And you set this on the floor right by your chair, and the tuba sits in the cup, and then the weight is taken off of the student. I recommend these for most players because they get the weight of the tuba off the body. So with the use of the tuba rest, I think you can pretty much get anybody playing the tuba. It's just a question of if they can get the vibrations happening right off the bat. They have to move large amounts of wind as the largest and the lowest of the brass instruments, and you've been finding this out as you've been playing the higher instruments. Everybody has a different flow rate. The trumpet is a very high flow rate in that it's under high pressure but low quantity of air. The tuba has a very low flow rate in that we're blowing lots of air at a very slow speed, and it changes as we go down. So you need somebody who's able to move that kind of wind. And actually, for us, that kind of breathing, and we'll talk about breathing as well, if you can get into that kind of open, relaxed breathing as a player and a teacher, you can get to the right sounds pretty quickly. And the body type, we talk about teaching students. Oh, by the way, I should say this. There's a link to my tuba outline in the bottom. of this video, go ahead and click on that, and you can download a copy of it for yourself. And also, shameless plug, please click like and subscribe. I've got a lot of warm-up things on my YouTube page that you can use and your students can use as well. So, starting students. A lot of times tuba players are switched. That's kind of normal in our world. We'll get a lot of, sometimes we'll start baritone or euphonium players, as I'm sure you've covered in class. Baritones and euphoniums are two different instruments. In America, we kind of lump them together, but we call them baritones around here just because we sometimes don't know any better. Everything we play in America is a euphonium. Just FYI. Sometimes you'll start on the euphonium and then switch to tuba in the 7th grade. Sometimes you'll get trumpet players that'll switch. Trumpet player that has a rough time playing high notes sometimes will switch. Sometimes trombone players will switch. I've had switches from every instrument. I think one of the worst things to do, however, though, is to take, for instance, a failing third trumpet player who doesn't do the work and put that person on tuba. They may come to the tuba and enjoy it, but you got to understand that it takes just as much work to play the tuba as it does to play any instrument. And if your heart's not in it, it doesn't matter. So it needs to be a bright student. It needs to be a rhythmically sound student, because we are, of course, the rhythmic center of the band as far as pitch is concerned. I know that the percussion play a rhythmic role, but it's the bass and the percussion together that create our rhythmic drive in those types of music, marches and faster types of music. And we also have to have a good ear, because we're the harmonic foundation of the entire concert band. We're the lowest instrument in the band, and therefore we set the harmonic language when we're playing functionally tonal music. Rhythmically sound and have a good ear. So switching players to the tuba then becomes interesting, because from where they come. Actually, the most success I've ever had, thanks Reg, he's dropping a huge bone. The most success I've ever had switching students comes from flute and clarinet. Flute players, because they're used to using a good bit of wind already, and clarinet players because they're used to having something stuck in between their teeth, which gives us, Stephen Mead, the great euphonium player who I've linked in down below, has this concept of space, that we have to have an open space that our thumb can easily fit into to play the instrument. Well, the clarinet already has something basically that shape stuck in their mouth, so all you have to do is train them to relax a little bit, to worry about that not being there, and they'll blow with a relatively open embouchure right away. Probably the least successful switches I have are from trumpet. Not to say that it's not possible, but I've had a greater success rate from the woodwinds than I have from the brass. Euphonium players typically do okay, but they're used to blowing in that middle register of the instrument, and getting into the low register is interesting. And that brings up an interesting point too. When we think about brass instruments, and we think about say, for instance, a trumpet player playing their third space C, B-flat concert. That note vibrates the same frequency no matter which instrument you put it on. For instance, if I put it on that note, is just a B-flat, right? That's B-flat in the bass staff. The trumpet B-flat that I'm talking about, that note is buzzed the same way whether I'm playing a trumpet mouthpiece, a tuba mouthpiece, a euphonium mouthpiece, or a horn mouthpiece. The buzz is exactly the same. So if a student can play that high note but can't play low, the tuba is probably not going to work, because 3 octaves lower, that's a very relaxed open buzz. Sometimes that's a problem for some people to get to. Euphonium players usually get there a little quicker. Trumpet players can have a hard time getting down into that low register. Now, again, there are no always and nevers in music, as you know. You've heard that from all your teachers, I hope. Nothing is always and never. If you've got a kid who really says, man, I want to play that tuba. I came from trumpet, believe it or not. I was the first chair trumpet in my 6th grade band, whatever that means. And the band director said, hey, I need one of you bigger kids to play the tuba. And I went, me, I'm bigger. And so, that's the rest is history, as they say. But when you're trying them out, especially when you're in the fitting stage, you want to find someone who has very easy to create those lower sounds, and you can check that away from the instrument. Just have them go. That's actually part of the way I warm up every day, is just to relax and play pitches with the air, and then have them buzz the mouthpiece. I mean, the concept is relatively easy. If you can get them to buzz that low note, it's no problem. Some tuba players, when you start them, will start in the mid-register. For instance, when you do the fittings, if any of you have never been out on fittings, give me a buzz sometime and we'll talk about that. I used to do fittings for Colonial Music, which is now Music and Arts. And finding a student, for instance, would pick the tuba up, and the first note out would be that B flat right in the bass staff, which is great, and then say, okay, try to play lower, and barely make that F. You got to watch out, because if it's almost as hard to teach them to play low as it is to teach a brass player to play high, because you have to learn how to relax and move slower air. So, of course, the way to make that switch happen most effectively, especially if you're switching somebody in 7th grade, that puts that student behind the curve a little bit. Really suggest lessons, or give the lessons yourself. I mean, it's really going to be the only mode to success for someone who's switching, is to get them some lessons. Yeah, good. When to switch 7th grade is quite normal. So again, any questions about that, please give me a holler. So the types of tubas. I introduced you to my B flat tuba. His name is Papa, and my E flat tuba, who is Little Thunder. Yes, they have names, and that's totally normal, I think. So types of tubas. Tubas come in 4 sizes. We have 3/4, 4/4, 5/4, and 6/4. Those numbers sound odd, like 3/4, not quite full size, 4/4, full size, 5/4, over full size, 6/4, really over full size. And actually, some companies make what they call a 7/4 tuba. And some companies actually make 1/2 tubas, which is really, if you go half of a tuba, you've got a euphonium, right? So the 3/4 tuba is going to be the smaller in stature. And the other thing to remember about this numbering system is that it is not standard. Every company has their own version of what 3/4, 4/4, 5/4, and 6/4 stands for. A 5/4 instrument in one company's lineup is going to be a 6/4 instrument in somebody else's, or a 4/4 instrument in somebody else's. It depends on the company. Suffice it to say that 3/4 are smaller, 4/4 are slightly bigger, 5/4 are quite big, and then the 6/4 are gigantic. My B flat tuba lists off as a 5/4 tuba, and a lot of it has to do with bell size. This has a 19-inch bell on it, which is very large, but my E flat tuba has a 19-inch bell on it as well, and so that qualifies as a 5/4 E flat tuba, and this is a 5/4 B flat tuba. But some companies would call this a 4/4 B flat tuba. It doesn't matter. The thing about tubas, unlike the other brass instruments, is that if you notice, all different brands, they all look different. They all have different shapes and different configurations, and that's because people are so amazingly different, and this instrument is reliant upon your body to hold it. I am very lucky. This tuba, which, again, just a little history lesson, belonged to my teacher, Gary Tyree. He gave it to me right before he passed 3 years ago. It fits my body perfectly. I sit in the chair, and the instrument sits on my lap, and I do not have to strain, struggle, move my body around, or do anything. If you've got a student who's like, we talk, and I should have talked about this a little earlier. A student puts the horn up and they've got to reach like this, they're never going to play it the right way. Or if they're hunched over and they got to play like this, it's never going to work the right way. So that's why tubas all come in different shapes and sizes. Problem for you as an educator is that you are going to be stuck with whatever's in your school unless someone floats you a big grant and says, go buy some tubas. At that point, you call me and say, hey, what should I get? And we can talk. There are lots of things out there these days. Typically, the 3/4 instruments are 3-valve instruments, just like the trumpet, and everything's the same, except it's in bass clef and concert pitch. So, open C on the B flat trumpet is a concert B flat. Open B flat on the tuba is open B flat, A concert, A flat concert, G flat concert, F concert, and E concert, right? And it's all the way chromatically. It's the same exact setup as the trumpet. So your fingers, for you in brass class, will all be the same. You just have to read bass clef and just change it in your head. No big deal. The 4/4 tubas are typically 4-valve. And I believe you probably talked about what the 4th valve is. The 4th valve is actually just, it lowers the range of the instrument a major third. And those of you that have had orchestration understand that it does not put the tuba in the key of F, just like the F attachment does not put the trombone in the key of F. It simply lowers the range by a major third from low E concert to low C concert. That's all it does. Because you never actually, to say that the instrument is in the key of F now, even though they call it an F attachment on the trombone, the instrument is not in F when you play it with the trigger down. No one plays the instrument as an F trombone. No one holds down the 4th valve on the tuba and plays it as an F tuba. It's not. The reality is that the 4th valve and the F attachment just give you different options for slide positions and fingerings. And then the 5/4 and 6/4 tubas that I talked about are typically professional models that you don't need to worry about. However, if you have a student who's going off to college, they do need to be thinking about that. And that's an instance, again, where you do your research and figure it out, and then give your local friendly tuba player a call and say, hey, my kid wants to go to college. What's out there? Types of tubas. Good. Rotary valve and piston valve. You'll see this. I've got both here. My E-flat tuba is a piston valve tuba. 4 pistons and actually 1 rotor, so it's a 5-valve configuration. The piston valves are exactly the same as the piston valves that you found on the trumpet. And I have the rotary valve B-flat tuba. And, you know, everybody says what's better, what's worse. There is no better or worse. Are there tonal differences? Sure. I think slurring is easier on a rotary valve instrument. I think articulation is easier on a piston valve instrument simply for the way everything works. But the reality is, at your stage of the game for an educator, it doesn't really matter. When you go out, if you get the opportunity to buy a new tuba, you've got to find something that fits your budget and that will last over the long haul. And so that's why, you know, you want to think about those kind of things. Piston versus rotor, leave that as a professional decision for a student down the road. You know, I was playing predominantly piston horns for a long time until Gary gave me this, and I switched back, and I'd played rotors in high school and college, and I got back to the rotary horn, and I'm like, wow, I can't believe I left it. I loved it. So I love them both. It doesn't matter. So don't worry about that. Rotary valves are easier to maintain because you don't have to oil them like piston valves. You have to take them out all the time. But if a rotary valve gets messed up, it is a bear to fix, and they have to be fixed by professionals. Piston valves, you can usually take care of that stuff yourself. Piston valves, typically, I think one of the only things about them is that you have to push a piston valve down farther than you do a rotary valve. But again, at the middle school, high school stage of the game, students aren't going to be playing so fast that they're going to come up to you and say, hey, you know, my technique would get better if you bought me a rotary valve tuba. And then you would just say, no, go home and practice. They'll be fine. The tuba comes as well as in 4 sizes. It also comes in 4 different flavors. There's the B-flat tuba, which is the largest. The C tuba, which we talked about, the B-flat tuba is an 18-foot end-to-end tube. The C tuba is a 16.5-foot end-to-end tube. The E-flat tuba is a 14.5-foot end-to-end tube. And the F tuba is a 12-foot end-to-end tube, which, strangely enough, is exactly the same length as the French horn. The French horn is just built way too tiny to play all those low notes that it plays. The F tuba and the French horn are exactly the same length. Go figure that one out. It's just the size of the tube that makes it different, which is why the bass trombone is different from the tenor trombone. The bass trombone is the same length instrument as the tenor trombone. It just has a bigger tube and a bigger bell, so it's built to play the lower frequencies a little easier. Same exact length instrument, no change. So you're going to find B-flat tubas in your school. Occasionally, for instance, if you get a job in Columbus Public and you end up at one of the high schools and you'll open up one of the secret doors that are hidden somewhere in some of those old buildings and you'll find some E-flat tubas sitting around. I actually had one of my pals who teaches over at Dominion Middle, Bruce Carlson. If you get a chance to meet him, he's really cool. Bruce found an E-flat sousaphone in one of his schools, and of course public schools can't throw stuff away, so they said, give it away. So I had an E-flat sousaphone from Columbus Public Schools, believe it or not. The E-flat tuba was the instrument of choice for a very long time. So you still, in some older schools, may find an E-flat tuba sitting around. I doubt that you will, because the tubas just don't stand up to the rigors of teenagers, and so they pass away gently, and new tubas are purchased. But if you do happen to find an E-flat tuba, let me know. They are playable if it's fixable, and they're easier to play than B-flat tubas because they're 14.5 feet long versus 18 feet long. My British friends always laugh, and they say, how come you Americans start your kids on the biggest B-flat tuba? Because think about it. Even the 3/4 B-flat tuba is still an 18-foot long tube. That's a lot of tube. It's still a 36-foot long vibrating column of air for the pedal B-flat, which is crazy. That's a lot for a youngling to play. So, you know, you're gonna have B-flat tubas. Don't worry about it. If you find something else, let me know. The F tuba and the E-flat tuba are professional instruments. We call those bass tubas, the F and the E-flat, the smaller ones, and we call the C and the B-flat contrabass tubas, because contra means an octave. So they're not totally an octave lower than the smaller tubas, but they do play in the lower octave, so we call them contrabass. brands of instruments. You're going to find B-flat tubas. Brands, there are so many out there. When I was in school, we had Mono Weston, Miraphone. Yamaha was just coming around. They were terrible. Actually, the Yamahas pretty much still are terrible, the student stuff. And that's a biased opinion, and you're absolutely right. Oh, by the way, as I talk about brands of instruments, I am going to throw this disclaimer out that I do not play for or represent any company. So any information or advice or opinion that I give you on an instrument is completely mine. It has nothing to do with me getting any money from these instrument companies. So in junior high, the instruments that are still around, the numbering system has changed. Yamaha, YBB, 103, 104, 102, those are all 3/4 piston valve horns in different configurations. 3 pistons up front or 3 pistons up high. The 3 pistons up on the top is a British design from the compensating system, which we can talk about in a little bit. Again, not anything that you really need to know about. You probably talked about the compensating system when you talked about euphoniums. But that valve up configuration is an old Besson thing that was copied by lots of companies. And if you didn't know, FYI, Yamaha started out copying different companies' instruments. That's how they made their mark, and now they are a wildly successful company that's designing and building their own, much like the Chinese companies that we'll get to. Another one is the King 1135. I love the King 1135. It's a 3-piston up front configuration. It's relatively tall, but the valves are placed lower so that a young person has the valves right where they need them to be. Sometimes the valve front configurations, for instance, on my horn, this is comfortable for me. For a young player, that would be pretty high to have the arm up there playing. So, again, as you're purchasing, you need to think about those things. But you're going to be stuck with what you've got. Big mouth brass. I can't remember the model numbers off the top of my head, but I have a big mouth brass E-flat tuba that my friend Dick Barth designed and had built in a Chinese factory called Jinbao. You'll hear a lot about Jinbao, Jin-BAO. Jinbao makes instruments for lots of manufacturers. Wessex tubas that are very, very popular are built in the Jinbao factory. I'm just going to throw you a note out there. You've heard caveat emptor, right? Buyer beware. You have to be careful what you order. These Chinese, now I've had this instrument for 14 years and it's held up fantastically well. Some instruments don't. Some instruments that come from China are absolutely terrible. They're absolutely terrible. Some are phenomenal. You just have to be very careful because the prices look really wonderful. They do. This E-flat tuba, if it were built in Germany, would have cost me $18,000. I paid $4,000 brand new. And I buy all my own tubas. Like I said, I don't get any kickbacks from any companies. My Miraphone tuba, list price is still somewhere in the $15,000 to $16,000 range for the Miraphone 191 that I play. And the 186, which is the standard tuba horn, is right around $9,000. School price is probably going to be around $7,000. They're expensive. Tubas are expensive. But I can safely say that with the proper vetting, a Chinese instrument can be very good for your school. All right, so don't shy away from them. But again, if you have questions, give me a call. If you see something stenciled by Schiller, which sounds like a German company, that instrument is made in the Jinbao factory to very low standards, and it's a piece of junk. You might run into one that seems okay. You'll find one by Tuba Exchange called the Tuba Exchange brand from a company called the Tuba Exchange. We'll talk about them in a minute. That's made in the Jinbao factory, but it is built to a higher quality. Jinbao factory operates like this. I go into Jinbao and I say, hey, I want you to build me a line of tubas. And they'll say, okay, how much do you want them to cost? And you'll say this, and they'll say, great, then it's going to cost us this much to make them, and that means that we're going to not do this kind of quality control, the soldering may not be very good, blah, 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 and this good on this checklist. As much as you want to spend on your instrument, that's what they will make. So you have to be conscious of that. That being said, the big mouth brass instruments are fantastic. Jupiter is another great instrument that I like for the junior high. Their 3/4 instruments are awesome. I've played several of them. Jupiter is a Taiwanese company that is based in Austin, Texas. And that's a very reputable company and great instruments. You see some professional line Jupiter instruments as well. For high school instruments, Červený is a Slovakian company that is now is one of the oldest tuba manufacturers in the world. My first tuba was a Červený, and I absolutely loved it. The 641 is a 4/4 4 rotary horn. And it's very similar to the Miraphone 186. Comes in a little cheaper, still European built and very high quality instruments. Miraphone. Miraphone is the Cadillac of tubas. They're built in Germany. Been there for hundreds of years. They're a fantastic company. All of their instruments are fantastic. I've never played a Miraphone that I didn't like. They do piston and rotor versions. The 186 is the standard B-flat tuba. It's the one that you probably have seen in colleges. Those of you, we have at Capitol, we own a 4/4 Miraphone C tuba, which is the classic C tuba. It has the very long bell and the very short valve section, and they're just incredible instruments. You can't go wrong with a Miraphone 186. They're expensive, but they'll last forever. Mono Weston, another German company that's actually right near Miraphone in Germany. Oh, hi, Reggie. My puppy came to say hi. The Mono Weston 25, I grew up on that in high school. It's an okay tuba. That's not changed over the years. They've reconfigured it slightly. I've always felt them to be a little bit poofy sounding and hard to control. Same money as the Miraphone. I'd buy Miraphone if you can afford it. The King 2341 is a fantastic instrument built by Rob Phillips, who is owner of Buckeye Brass and Winds. You all know who that is. He built that when he was still working for UMI up in Cleveland. Design. It's an old American design that was a big smokestack, removable bell because it had a recording bell. And this is a funny thing. If you've ever seen one of those old tubas, you can actually take the bell off and put a recording bell on, and the recording bell faces forward like those marching euphoniums that the Ohio State Marching Band uses. And they used to use those back in the old direct-to-disc recording days because if you've ever seen pictures from the late 19th, early 20th century recordings, the whole band is standing in front of this gigantic horn, which is can be 7 or 8 feet in diameter. It's huge. Well, in those recordings, the string basses could never be heard. So they would put 5 or 6 tuba players on those parts and think about the Beethoven symphony string bass parts. Guys playing that stuff on the tuba, just really nailing them down. Those recording bells got the sound into that horn so you could hear the bass. That was the whole point. That's why they called them recording bells. So Rob took this old recording bell design, shrunk it down, expanded the size of the bell. Valve set is pretty much the same as it was for the last 90 years, but it's a great instrument. I love the way it plays. That one is, and again, that one's pricey, but not terrible. It's a 4/4 4-piston horn. Another one that you'll see quite often is the St. Petersburg, which is a 4/4 4-rotor horn, very similar to the Miraphone, built in St. Petersburg, Russia. That company came to after communism fell in 1989, and all of the instrument manufacturers went out of business because they were state-owned. So a bunch of tuba makers got together in St. Petersburg and put together a factory. And the instruments that came out initially were not very good. They nickel plate them, and they still nickel plate them. Nickel plating is, if you talked about French horns, the Con 8D is nickel plated. It's not silver plate. It's nickel. The nickel plating used to come off, and it would. I actually got a nickel silver sliver in my finger once from a St. Petersburg tuba. That being said, I love the way they sound. They're awesome. They have this beautiful, big throaty sound, and the people at Tuba Exchange tech those horns pretty well when they come in from Russia. They run them through their shop to make sure they're in good shape, and if they don't like it, they send them back out. That's the Tuba Exchange. Big Mouth Brass also has a great 4/4 lineup, which is awesome, and those are available at right here in Plain City. Rob sells those at Buckeye Brass, so it's easy to go see those if you want to. The big problem about tubas anymore is that there are very few showrooms in the world. You kind of have to buy them sight on the scene. You can go to Buckeye Brass and Winds. Rob has a few horns there. The Tuba Exchange, which is in Durham, North Carolina. Dillon Music, which is in New Jersey, just outside of New York City. Baltimore Brass, which is in Baltimore, run by Dave Federley, who used to be the tuba player in the Baltimore Symphony. And that's pretty much it. Those are the only places where you can actually go where there's a showroom of tubas. Other than that, you kind of go on recommendation. It's tough. It can be tough. Eastman is a Chinese-built, American-owned company, and they are turning out some phenomenal tubas, student line and professional line, so don't shy away from Eastman Brass. In our area, Reddig Music carries them. They actually copied Rob's 2341, and he didn't like it when I told him, but I thought that it played better than his horn. So don't shy away from that. One of my high school students has one of those, and it's really, really nice. I can't remember the model number, but you'll have to look that up. Wear and Grill tubas, Vine Grill or Werrell tubas. They were made in Brazil for a while after Big Mouth Brass was made in Brazil. Those are some pretty good tubas if you can find them. I actually haven't heard a whole lot about that company recently, so I'm not sure where they are in the bigger scheme of things. The other brands that I was talking about, I talked about Wessex. When I did this outline, I kind of put Wessex down here as other brands. Wessex has really jumped to the fore in tuba building and the tuba world. Really some really wonderful horns, and including their student line things are great. Several students at Capitol have owned Wessex tubas, and several of my friends have purchased them. And even Chris Olka, who plays in Cincinnati Symphony, I think he's purchased a Wessex and an Eastman as well for professional use. So don't be afraid to check those out. And M&M tubas. It's a Chinese-built brand, but also it's an American company, and it's not on the outline, but Mac Brass out of Virginia. It's another Jin Bao company. They have some really good tubas as well. In fact, I just bought a Mac Brass euphonium. Again, I'm not going to treat it the same way that a teenager is, but it's an awesome instrument, and it was $1,000 out the door. I think it's $1,200 now. It's delivered with a case and everything. So keep your eyes on those. Again, give me a buzz if you're not sure, so we can talk about it. Where to buy tubas, I talked to you about that. Buckeye Brass and Winds right here in Columbus area, Dillon Music, Baltimore Brass, the Tuba Exchange. Online, Woodwind and Brasswind typically tend to give you a good deal. Make sure that the company that you're working with, when you get your school assignment, there's going to be an instrument dealer contact you. Quite often they're old band directors. That is kind of the case with music and arts in this area and Reddig. See what kind of deal they can get you on an instrument. Quite often they can get you pretty good deals on some pretty high level stuff. So make sure you're checking. Woodwind and Brasswind is a big online retailer, and they used to have a storefront in South Bend, Indiana, which is where I bought my first horn. They don't anymore, but they still have a big online business. And Guitar Center, I believe, Music 123, Woodwind and Brasswind, and Musician's Friend. Those are all the same company. They're all run by the same, so their online stores are all the same. But you can get some really good deals because they deal in pretty high volume. Again, you just have to watch out for the big box stores. Sometimes the service can be a little in the dumper because it's an online store. So check with your instrument reps to see what kind of deals they can give you based on, and they can usually do you pretty well. Especially Music and Arts runs the same deals as Woodwind and Brasswind. So you can get some pretty good deals on tubas. Check with your instrument reps. And then at the end of the outline are some resources for the breathing gym. I cannot stress enough how much you need to know and use the breathing gym and do breathing exercises with your students. It is so amazingly crucial that you get them to focus on how to move wind right off the bat. And I don't care if it's woodwinds, brass, and percussion. Everybody needs to learn how to breathe like a musician, because if they don't do it from the very beginning, you're going to be struggling with it for the whole rest of your time with them. It's just the reality is you need to do the breathing gym. You can go on YouTube right now, type in the breathing gym. There's a 10-minute video with Sam and Pat, Sam Playfin and Pat Sheridan. Sam passed just a few years ago, way too early from this planet, but he and Pat were the leaders in this whole let's get out the breathing thing, because they both work with drum corps and make these groups sound like completely different just by focusing on breathing. Please, 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 please. If you ever want to have a breathing gym lesson, give me a buzz. Totally on me, all right? You get one freebie because you're in brass class right now. Take me up on it. Bring your instrument and we'll breathe and we'll talk about that stuff. It's really crucial. The breathing gym, the brass gym, is their daily routine book that everybody has one now. David Vining is an interesting cat. He used to teach he was at Bowling Green when I was a grad student there, and was teaching. He was on the one-year sabbatical replacement. Got the job at Cincinnati Conservatory. Developed focal dystonia, which is a neurological problem in the chops, and couldn't play anymore, and he retrained himself to play the trombone. He's now better than when he was at the Cincinnati Conservatory of Music. And he's got an amazing website of resources for brass playing. You should look him up, David Vining. And all these websites are here. George Paulton, friend of mine who used to teach at Marshall, fantastic exercises. Don Little, who has been at North Texas State for 42 years, phenomenal. Arnold Jacobs is our king Read the book, and I don't have it listed. Oh yes, Wind Song Press. If you go to the website under Arnold Jacobs, there's a book there called Song and Wind. All of you need to read it. It's like when I was in grad school, they made us all read The Inner Game of Music, and I don't know if anybody makes you read that anymore. You should read The Inner Game of Music and Song and Wind. Read those two books. And Tim Holt, another old friend of mine, who's got some great exercises out there. And then at the end, I list off some players. These are some of the best in the world. They're great people, wonderful teachers, and they all have great resources. Do not forget to take advantage of the free resources that are at your hand. And if you ever have any questions about the tuba, the euphonium, brass, anything, please give me a holler. I would love to talk to you about it. I think I've covered everything. All of the things that you talked about the techniques of playing brass are all the same on the tuba. Articulation is articulation. It just happens a little differently. We tongue lower in the mouth. The breathing is big and more because we use more wind than anybody else. But everything else is the same. And again, I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to play more. But I can show you a few things. I'm going to do a little bit of demonstrating of some playing techniques, and hopefully they'll give you a little bit to think about. But so that's the word part. Let's play a little music. So I talked about breathing. The big breath in is the most important thing. We think ho, to. Do that all together. So when I play my F concert, free flow of wind, and the air is always moving in and out. It never stops. It never goes. We never do that. Any exercises, Jeffrey Funderburk came up with a bunch of exercises back in the 70s, 1970s, where he had you inhale for 4, hold for 4, and blow for 4. And I said, when in music do we hold our breath? Answer, never. So don't hold your breath. Blow. Inhale and blow. Ho, to. The music and the air is always moving. Train yourself and train your students to be able to breathe for any number of counts. If I have a 7-count note that I need to play and I've got a measure of rest beforehand, I'll take all four beats to breathe. Having lots of time to breathe is crucial. We tuba players are counting rests a whole bunch of our day anyhow. So learning how to breathe in for 4 counts. Then you can do in for 3. The big difference for me in breathing exercises is that I do the breathing exercises on the horn, while I'm with the horn. I do some things before I start. I'll stretch, you guys are all young and virile and flexible muscles, and I'm old, and I have to stretch more than you do. So I do a lot of stretching before I play, but I also focus on the breathing while I'm playing. Now I need to inhale for 3 counts and see if I can still blow for 8. Now can I inhale for 2 and blow for 8? Not sure if I'm going 8. You count for me. Again. Right, and now I have to inhale for 1, and I'm going to go even slower. Made it a little farther. We have to train ourselves to breathe with different amounts of time. I was at a clinic many years ago when I was playing Wilson instruments, and I was sitting with Marty Erickson at the Wilson booth at a tuba convention, and a young student came up and said, "Mr. Erickson, can I play for you?" And he said, "Absolutely." And so the student played and took his breath in a very odd spot, and Marty stopped him and said, "You could realize the breathing has to be as musical as the music." And so what he was thinking is, if I'm playing a say for instance, Amazing Grace. problem there is that my breaths were so gigantic that the song lost its meaning, right? So what I need to do as a tuba player, and one of the things that you're going to find is that your students are not going to be able to make those big phrases that you want, like the trumpets will be able to make, because they aren't using as much air. We're using a ton of air. So I need to find the commas in the music. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. You don't want to spend all that time breathing. You want to spend the time playing beautiful notes, right? So I have to be dividing and subdividing, which is why we talk about that a lot, and your band director said it to you and you're going to be saying it to them. Make sure you know what you're talking about. If you're dividing 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and that's probably not enough. You need to be subdividing. 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 1E and a 2E and 3E and a 1E and a 2E and 3E and a 1. Teach yourself to breathe on the 16th note. I triple dog dare you, because then you're going to be better. It's going to sound better. I can play a longer phrase now because in my mind I'm thinking 16ths. Da 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 da. And you train, but you notice that I'm also breathing very relaxed. I'm making a bit more noise than I normally would because I want you to hear that I'm doing it. But normally, dee da dee 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 da 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 da. I will breathe that quietly because if I'm open and relaxed, I can get that air in very quickly. All right. Articulation on the tuba. When you talk about, we say ho, toe, toe. Check where your tongue is hitting. Toe, toe, toe. It's hitting right at that little bump at the top of your roof of your mouth, right, in the front of the hard palate before you get into the soft palate. We never tongue back there. Da, 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 da. It'd be kind of weird. But we double tongue back there, don't we? Ta, 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 right? But single tonguing, ta, 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 ta. For tuba players, it's going to be, now again, we are all built differently. There is no, and I'm not going to say this to you, and if you challenge me on this, I'll come over there. We are all built differently. We can't say your tongue needs to be doing this. We can ask a student to experiment, and that's the thing that I found the best with young students, especially. They're willing to experiment, right? Get to the college level game, and you say, "Hey, we experiment with your tongue position," and they're like, And I saw a bunch of you roll your eyes when I said that. Experiment with the tongue position. The lower we go in the range, typically the lower the tongue moves on the teeth. So when I'm playing. I'm tonguing right on the top of my back of my top teeth. When I'm almost getting between my teeth. You don't want to have the tongue come between the teeth, but it's getting pretty darn close. The tongue moves down as we articulate. The tuba can tongue just as fast as everybody else. Single tonguing, double tonguing, it's all a function of wind. If you want your students to work on single tonguing, work on it away from the instrument first. Ta 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 ta. But have them not say two, because 2 2 2 is high note. If I want to tongue at a high F, that's where I'm going to tongue it, is 2 2 2 2 2, right above the teeth. But I am a tuba player. I got a tongue on my teeth. 2 2 2 2 2. Same thing for double tonguing. And if you teach them double tonguing, when you teach them double tonguing, which you should do very early in their career, the book doesn't do it. I don't think that Standard of Excellence does double tonguing in Red Book. You should do double tonguing because double tonguing is important. If you can get your brass players to double tongue, single tonguing is easy. If they can double tongue, that means they're using their wind the right way. The tongue is a big, stupid muscle. It doesn't do anything on its own. It has that wind. If I don't use any wind, it goes, it's terrible, right? So we have to have wind. You can practice it, which is wind. We call that wind patterning. You'll learn about that in the brass gym if you get that, and the breathing gym, which you will buy because they're on this book. This is the handout that I gave you. And then you can do that on the horn. And then you put a pitch on it. And you get double tonguing, right? And triple tonguing is the same thing. Da-da-ga, 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 da-da-ga. But all the multiple tonguings have to be done slowly, and they need to sound good slowly. That's triple tonguing, right? I could have single tongued that. The goal is to make them sound very similar. All right? I changed partway through. Lip slurs. Lip slurs are crucial for us. Lip slurs should actually be called tongue slurs to a certain extent because the tongue moves a little bit. If I go, now you notice me moving a little bit, right? That's called pivot. I'm pivoting. And that's if I can show you, and maybe you can see it on this. One of my cool students at Thomas Worthington made me a bunch of these cutout tuba mouthpieces. These are awesome. Because what they do, I can see what the lip is doing. So I don't know if I can get close enough, and I don't know if you want to see this. So let's see. Let me try this. Yeah, oh, there we go. You can maybe see how when I go high, my lower lip comes up underneath my upper lip. That's just called a pivot. It's not something that, it's not a, how do I say this? It's not a system that somebody invented. It's a system that Don Reinhardt observed by watching hundreds of brass players play. And it's quite easily, when we're going to play high notes, if you are a traditional downstream player, which I am, and 75 to 80% of people are, you typically tend to blow the air downward. Maybe you can see that better. Regular, as I go higher, and you can hear it. That's how I get the high notes to come out. Well, to make that, to keep the seal of the mouthpiece, I move forward. Right? And so that's the pivot. Now again, come and see me sometime and we can work on that together. It's not a difficult thing, and if you're a brass player, you probably already do it. You just don't know you do it, or no one's told you do it, or people were afraid to tell you do it. I'm not afraid anymore. So come and see me. So lip slurs are crucial for us, and it's how we build range and of course scales. I mean, everything that you'll do with any instrument, you gotta learn your scales. But lip slurs are very, very, very important because the low register needs to be singing. And that's all the way down to the pedal B flat. You'll get some students that can play it on there pretty well right away. And it's a lot of fun when they can. So make sure you're asking your students to do a lot of those kind of things. The low register, we typically get the mouth more open as we go low. D, ah, da, ooh, ooh in the mid register, and T in the high register. When I get way up around those. That was the F at the top of the treble staff. My tongue is arched way high. That's the only way I'm going to get that note to come out. The same way a singer does. Everything, the air has to speed up to get that note out, so you arch the tongue, and the air has to go faster over the top of it to get out of the lips. It's all physics, which is, it's a cool thing. Don't sweat it. Just do the work. So I hope that you got something out of this lecture. Again, I am so sorry that we couldn't meet in person, but if you have any questions, I'm sitting in my basement. Well, I actually go upstairs sometimes. And while we're in this lockdown, I'm doing all my teaching at home. Shoot me a message. Ask me questions. I'm around. Say, hey, can we get together and so-and-so? I have some questions about the tuba. Please ask, please ask, please ask. Okay? I think that covers pretty much everything. If you guys have any questions, you know how to get a hold of me. If you again, please like and subscribe my YouTube page. There's a ton of warm-up material you can take. It's all free for download. So all those routines that I have posted, you can download all that stuff. All right, great. Good end of the semester. Good luck on your exams. I'm sorry that the semester had to end this way. It's weird, but you got through. And I wish you all the best. Have a great summer. Practice a ton. If you want a tuba lesson, stop by when we can finally see each other again. And take care of yourselves. Bye.